Today we will get to know one of the most ancient civilizations on Earth, and that's ancient Egypt. The history of the state that existed millennia ago opens its doors to the world of knowledge. For over 200 years, it has never ceased to delight us with discoveries. 3,000 years of great civilization before Christ, and 5,000 years today. 30 dynasties, great culture and science, which gave us mathematics and astronomy, glass and cement, a marriage contract and toothpaste, wigs and soap, the first written language, and the first scientific works in the form of books, a calendar. Egypt is a mystery. This is what the ancient Greeks called this country, whose borders stretch from north to south along the Great Nile River. The country owes its greatness to the river. But it all began as elsewhere. Ancient people, the Neolithic era, whose most important discovery was ceramics. Pots for cooking food were made from a mixture of clay and straw, and the ceramics began to be used in rituals. In Egyptian burials, ritual pots were found, which determined the time frame for the development of civilization. 4000 BC, the territory of North Africa was mostly savanna. The Neolithic period led to the domestication of the first animals, the beginning of the construction of the first structures made of clay bricks, dried in the sun. Agriculture came to this territory from Mesopotamia, followed by beer brewing. Beer has become the main drink of this area, which is confirmed by research by scientists and the discovered cirrhosis of the liver in a large number of investigated human remains. Fertile soils fertilized during spills yield 20 crops in the worst year, 20 times more than planted. The climate changed gradually and became drier. Due to these and other factors, civilization begins to form in the Nile Valley. Shipbuilding and trade begin to develop, and writing appears. Unique ceramics are presented in the showcases of the pre-dynastic period. The jugs painting introduces us to the first ideas of religion. The rich fauna of the Nile Valley is drawn with the artist's steady hand. The images of huge flocks of flamingos are quite recognizable. The mountains shown in the background belong to other countries. This is an area beyond the borders of Egypt. The sunboat shows the silhouettes of a dancing goddess, which we can see in the Brooklyn Museum. Wide hip sand hands raised in the dance repeat the outlines of the horns of the sacred cow, which would later become the goddess of love and fertility, Hathor. A heaven boat makes its way from east to west into the land of the dead to perform the rite of rebirth. This lady is more than 5,000 years old. We can meet her at the Brooklyn Museum. Her graceful terracotta figure, slim waist, luscious hips, and pronounced breasts are perfect proportions. Who's this charming goddess of love, with her arms raised up like wings? She's wearing a white skirt. She has a bird's head instead of a face. It's no surprise. This artifact was found in Egypt, where humans and animals represented an amazing symbiosis. The fauna of the Nile Valley is expressed through the drawings, decorating ancient ceramics. Approximately 3,500 years BCE, the ancient Egyptians began to practice the burial of the dead in ceramic pots. They buried mainly children, newborns, and prematurely born babies. However, there were cases when they did the same with the bodies of adults. Some scholars suggest that the reason for this type of burial is due to a lack of money. The poor could not afford to perform the same rituals as the rich. However, scientists believe that ceramic pots were valuable for the poor inhabitants of ancient Egypt, and they didn't want to part with them. The researchers paid attention to the fact that the words pot and womb are represented by the same hieroglyphs. So the burial of children in pots probably had some ritual meaning, where the ceramic product was supposed to symbolize the mother's womb. Probably, for the ancient Egyptians, such a ritual tradition was another way to maintain a connection between the world of the living and the dead. Experts' attention was drawn to the wall of an Egyptian tomb, where people were depicted in a ritual dance. The hieroglyphs that complete the images mention the words pot, egg, and birth secret. Additional evidence of the symbolic significance of such burials is that the dead were found in a fetal position. The sand and climate of Egypt are ideal for preserving burial materials. Nagada is a settlement where a huge amount of ceramics can be found. Surprisingly, this place turned out to be untouched, and it stores artifacts of several eras in its layers. It was according to them that scientists adopted the classification Nagada 123. They use it in determining the approximate dates of artifacts belonging to a certain chronological period. These are not just plates and ceramics, but also paintings. In the area of the city of Abydos, a valley strewn with pots was found. The Arabs who found it called the Valley of the Mother of Pots. For thousands of years, Egyptians brought red clay pots here. They were filled with food, and they were painted with letters to offer them to the dead. It was a place of remembrance for the dead. Not far away, the dynastic tombs of the first kings were found, one of which was King Scorpio, which inspired Hollywood to make a movie. The first associations with the name, Ancient Egypt, of course, are the pyramids, great buildings of a great civilization. They are the last shelter of dead pharaohs, and later of rich people. But the Egyptian pyramids are not about death. The pyramid is the concept of eternal life. In addition, the tomb is like a book about the life and the role of a person, the history of the country and specific people, religion. Stories about the gods and everyday life. This tomb is divided into two parts. First, this is the posthumous dwelling of a person, a burial chamber that has ceremonial paintings of tombs about the afterlife and a sarcophagus. The second part of the tomb is always dedicated to the memory of the deceased, a description of his life, his deeds. It is from these records that we learn about the life of the pharaohs and ordinary mortal people, although it is difficult to call them ordinary. They are the ancient Egyptian oligarchy. In addition, all the tombs of the pharaohs have pyramidal temples that are attached to them. The temples were connected by a processional road to the Nile and equipped with steles that depicted the life of the pharaohs. It is from these sources that we know so much about the history of this civilization. But the first burials were far from the architecture marvel that the pyramids are. In the Neolithic, they were pits over which a mound was built. As time progressed, in the attempt to add more splendor to them, people began to smear them with silt from the Nile, and gradually the architecture of the tomb began to resemble a coffin. This was the mastaba. Rectangular in shape, its walls were several meters high. Inside, there were an altar, a burial chamber, and sometimes even pantries. The first mastabas arose during the First Dynasty. In the future, the architecture of buildings improved, and now we see the fruits of the development of the civilization, the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Mysterious and terrible with their curses, but in essence, this is the creation of human hands, an attempt to achieve immortality. The name of the person who began the first famous architect is known to us. And yes, genius, it began with Imhotep, the first polymath in world history. He was an architect, engineer, scientist, first doctor, poet, and thinker. Imhotep designed the first pyramid in Saqqara, near Memphis, the tomb of Djoser, as well as a complex of architectural structures surrounding the pyramid. Imhotep is considered the inventor of pyramidal form in architecture. He proposed to build 3 more smaller mastabas above a stone mastaba, the rectangular tomb of the pharaoh, turning the mastaba into a 4-step pyramid Later, the number of steps of the pyramid was increased to 6, and it reached 61 meters in height. Thus, Imhotep is the founder of the architectural tradition of the entire Old Kingdom. In addition, there is reason to consider Imhotep also the inventor of the column in architecture. But back to the famous Pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara. The Pyramid of Djoser is a huge step forward when it comes to engineering and design. Imhotep came up with the idea of putting 6 mastaba structures on top of each other, and thereby getting a 6-step pyramid as a staircase to the afterlife. Here, for the first time, Imhotep made a starry ceiling above the burial chamber. Here we can find 6 kilometers of underground passages. Even then, he provided anti-theft traps in the hopes of saving the tomb from looting. For the first time, ceramic tiles that are turquoise, the color of life and rebirth, were used in the interior decoration. They became the main decoration of the room. And in this way, they were repeating the decoration of the royal palace. 36,000 faience tiles imitating the pattern of a mat. Inside each tile, there is a hole through which a thread was strung and pressed into soft lime. The Met owns this little carpet. A larger collection of ceramic tiles are presented only in the Cairo Museum. Each pyramid received a name and was considered the last wife of the king. The ritual pyramid was considered a living deity, and the function of worshiping this deity was performed by the surrounding temples. Thus, a pyramidal complex was created, a small state for servicing the afterlife of the king. But the inhabitant of the tomb is not a mummy at all, but the sacred essence of Ka. It is to her that offerings are made. Green is the color of rebirth. The magic of the written and spoken word makes the Ka live forever. The tomb as a place of connection between our world, the world of the living, with the world of the dead. A statue, like a mummy in Egypt, is considered a living entity. A narrow gap was often left in one of the side walls. Since Serdab was placed behind the wall, an altar with a statue of the pharaoh, which monitors the offerings. Thus the pharaoh could look through the gap at those who came and receive what was sacrificed to him. The statue could be of different sizes, but often in human size. The eyes are inlaid with crystal rock. They scared the robbers of the pyramids when they saw a burning glaze in the light of torches. The royal archives tell about the life of the pyramid complex. The king receives food 5 times a day, 3 times in heaven and twice on earth. So the afterlife of the kings was very active. Monumental art developed together with architecture. The Egyptians were the first to make round sculptures. Various sculptural images were an integral part of the tombs and temple complexes. All of them were religious in nature. At the same time, the canon of the image of kings began to form. The materials from which the statues were made varied. Royal statues and statues of nobles were made mainly from stone, limestone, quartzite, granite. Figures of women, children, dwarfs, animals were often made from bone, faience, soapstone, and wood. Statues of kings and nobles had to meet a number of requirements. Their images were static. They were mostly seated statues. Sculptures depicting families were often used. Almost always, a woman was depicted as being below a man, hugging him, or a man hugging a woman with one arm, as a sign of patronage. Children were depicted in even smaller silhouettes. Men were painted with ochre, women in lighter yellow tones. Initially, the monumental tombs were the privilege of the pharaohs, but everything changes when high officials became rich. On March 7, 1920, the Metropolitan Museum of Art expedition entered into the Theban tomb number 280 again. Scientists were going to make some sketches. Due to the light of lanterns, which were aimed at a crack in the wall, an amazing picture flashed. The whole life of the royal nobleman Mekatir was laid out before the scientists. In the tomb of Mekatir, the chancellor and overseer of Mentuhotep I, the largest number of small wooden sculptures depicting servants engaged in a wide variety of activities was found. Such sculptures are typical for the period of the Middle Kingdom. The official filled an entire room at the back of his tomb with elaborate models of sanded and painted wood, which were to magically become his domain in the afterlife. Among them were 2 models of houses with swimming pools in the courtyards, where an official could indulge in ideal bliss, a bakery and a brewery, and next to them there was a barn. Mekatir certainly would not have suffered from hunger in the next world. All artifacts were divided between the underground and the Cairo Museum. Boats carrying Mr. Mekatir from the world of the living to the world of the dead set off for the Metropolitan. A statue of a priestess carrying gifts was also found there. A dress in the style of Rishi, imitating bird feathers. A basket with gifts on her head. The girl carries a duck in her hand. The statue remained in the tomb, and it's protected from encroachment. Mekatir was so rich that even his servants were buried with great luxury. On only one servant, 375 meters of linen were spent. The mummy looked like a cocoon, a rare case where the remains from the 21st century BCE came to us in excellent condition. The burial places of imperial officials and the necropolises of the wealthy inhabitants of the empire are very interesting and informative. From the paintings in the tombs, we learn about the everyday life of Egyptians. It is known that Egypt consisted of 42 provinces, and its southern regions were very rich, and they supplied gold, luxury goods, and cattle. Many valuable things were supplied from the African countries: ivory, ebony, Lebanese cedar, incense. Especially valuable to Egypt, lapis lazuli was brought from Asia, from distant Afghanistan. On the reliefs of the tomb, we see images of envoys from various countries, representatives of Syria, Crete and Nubia. Giraffes and other exotic animals were presented as gifts to Egypt. If Africa brought ebony and incense, then Crete brought works of art, bowls, ceramics, etc. Some things came down to us from graves. The murals of the tombs tell us about the technology of pottery production, the harvesting of crops and grapes, the production of wine, the manufacturing of raw bricks from a mixture of clay and the Nile silt. The royal pyramids were different. The Metropolitan Museum has a unique part of the interior decoration from the Pyramid of Senusret I. We see the huge stone buttresses that were part of the pyramid. At the top is a falcon, a symbol of royal power. Beneath it, we see the Siraj, a cartouche depicting the palace and the name of the pharaoh. The museum has 4 buttresses. 2 more are kept in the Cairo Museum. Bas-relief on the Senusret I, a winged solar disk, which was once located above the doorway in the temple. Bearers of gifts, ducks, cage bars. The works of Egyptian animal painters amaze us with their fidelity. In a cache near the pyramid, 10 statues of the king were found, which were not completed. Most of them are in the Cairo Museum. Apparently, the architect changed his idea during the work. Today, it is known for certain that professional builders built the tombs. They lived in separate settlements and passed on their skills from generation to generation. Since they knew all the secrets of the construction of the tombs, they were actually the bearers of the state secrets. The village of craftsmen is located near the Valley of the Kings. 250 to 300 people lived in it. The settlements of the masters were protected by the state, and the inhabitants were fully supported by the state. Educated and talented, it was their hands that built the tombs, their interior decoration, murals, and sculptures. The villages were free from work, only on major holidays. In the 12th century BCE, the first sit-in strike took place, when the villagers went to the foot of the temple and refused to work without receiving 2 free weeks. This week in Egypt lasted for 10 days. The 10th day was a day off. The history of tomb building is recorded in the tombs of great architects. The names of these people are known to us. How did the pharaohs live? In Egypt, just like in every Eastern culture, polygamy was practiced. The first wife was the main one and bore the title of the great royal wife. Her children were the main contenders to the throne. The royal wife had great power and influence on the policy of the state. The secondary wives of the pharaoh did not have that status, but their life was different from the Eastern harems known to us. The palace did not provide lodgings to the minor wives. They lived separately in small palaces, and they had their own court. It is known that one of the minor wives arrived at the court of the pharaoh with a retinue of 300 people. The daughters of the rulers of friendly countries became secondary wives as a sign of maintaining diplomatic ties. Amazing artifacts are on display at the Queen's Hall, Metropolitan Museum of Art. The grave of the grandson of Senusret I, Senusret II, was found in the sands of Egypt. The tomb was looted, but the women of his house were more fortunate, as part of the premises was flooded, and this saved the side chamber with ebony chests, found in 1914. Here you can see the necklace worn by Princess Sinatorianet, one of the most skillful works of that period, from the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 375 semi-precious stones enclosed in a gold pendant. Let's analyze this heraldic composition thoroughly. 1. 2 symmetrical falcons as symbols of the sun and royal power. 2. Scarab is a symbol of the movement of the sun, its creative and life-giving power. Watching the scarabs, the Egyptians noticed an interesting feature. The beetles always rolled their balls from east to west, and they only fly at noon. Attentive Egyptians saw in this a connection between the beetles and the sun. 3. Shinu, a talisman without beginning or end, inside which you see the sun and a scarab. This talisman, according to the ancient Egyptians, greatly contributed to the prolongation of life, protecting a person from the misfortunes of the mortal world. 4. Falcons hold 2 cobras in their beaks. Boreas, cobra, is the emblem of Lower Egypt. Ure was also associated with the sun and many gods. The cobra personified the fiery gaze of Ra, which was depicted as 2 uraeus, located on both sides of the solar disk. It was used as a protective symbol. The cobra spews fire at the approaching enemy. Number 5. Ankh, a cross with a ring-shaped pommel, a symbol of eternal life. It is often called the Egyptian cross, due to the fact that for a long time after Egyptians adopted Christianity, the image of the Ankh was used by the Copts as a Christian cross. 6. The god of eternity, Hiha, holds palm branches in his hands, a symbol which represents the number of years. 7. A bottle with a salamander weighs on the god's hand. Salamander as a hieroglyph means 100,000. To summarize the symbolism, the medallion is symbol of royal power, consecrated by the power of the gods, and the sun with the desire for a long life. Bracelets and tiaras, rings and earrings. The princess lived a long life. She was the daughter of the Senusret I. She lived during the time of the Senusret II, and she died during the reign of the Senusret III. Before us is a belt of cowrie shells, the sacred shells of the goddess Hathor, consisting of gold, carnelian, and turquoise beads, in the form of acacia seeds, between which 8 large golden hollow shells are strung at equal distances, each of which was soldered, 4 to 5 balls made from an alloy of copper and silver. Thus, with every movement the princess made, and especially during the dance, the belt rang slightly. Canopy, vessels with the heads of the princess. They kept the organs of the princess, placed there during the mummification procedure. wig of a royal lady with golden rings, electrum mirror. In the Hall of the Queens, we see things belonging to 3 Syrian princesses who arrived at the court as the wives of Thutmose III, the great conqueror, nicknamed the Egyptian Napoleon. Their small tomb was found by local residents and then examined by representatives of the Met. The younger wives of the pharaoh bore the title ornament of the king. If one of the wives was favored more than the other, then her title could rise to the rank, the only royal ornament. They did not receive the luxury that was available to the great royal wife. The symbols of the younger wives are gazelles. Another museum artifact is the diadem found in Egypt. It is called the diadem of the Hyksos. These are the nomads from the Arabian Peninsula. We see symbols of gazelles, a characteristic symbol of the younger wives of the pharaoh. Deer horns, which were found in the highlands of Syria. The burial of the royal Hyksos daughter was found in the eastern delta of the Nile. The diadem is made from electrum. Electrum is the most difficult alloy to make. It is a combination of gold, silver, and other metals. At present, it is almost impossible to obtain it. A metal similar to silver, but its shine is reminiscent of platinum.